Today we're going to talk about methods. We're going to use a very simple example, a program that talks about the weather. Here you see we've already entered some lines of code. First we define a few temperatures for Utrecht and for New York. We're writing some text on the screen. We ask the user to enter a region and then we give a weather forecast. Depending on the region, we write something else on the screen. Let's run this program. And it's raining and 40 degrees in Utrecht. And if I write New York, I get another report. There you go. Now, here you can already see that this is quite a lot of code to write in a single method. There's a few things happening. We're writing text. We're also sometimes writing almost the same text, like the temperature is something degrees. And C# and many other object-oriented programming offer ways to organize this code a little more and make it a bit shorter. And the main thing we're going to use to do that is methods. So methods are very helpful to separate code into different logical parts. For example, this part is about writing introduction information to the screen. So you could actually define a method that does this exactly. So let's add a method to the program. So I can remove these two lines. I write them in the method here. That's called write introduction text. And I call that method here. And when we run this, you see it has exactly the same behavior as before, but we've slightly shortened this method here and we separated out this code here. And now if we want to write a longer introduction text, basically this whole part stays the same and we can simply edit it here. Now this is an example of a method that doesn't take any parameters. We don't have to provide any information to it. It also doesn't return a result that we can store in a variable. And it doesn't return a result. You can see that by its return type, which is void, meaning nothing. Now you could also write a method that does have a return type. For example, let's try something like this. Let's rename this method to ask for region. And then we're also going to copy this line to the method. So ask for region writes this text and then reads the region from the console. And it stores it in a variable. Now instead of storing it in a variable, we have to return it as a result. So ask for region shouldn't have as a return type result void, but it should have string. And because there's string here, we can store that result in a variable. We're not done yet. Here we simply ask for the region and we still have to return it as a result. And for that, we don't store it in a variable, but we use the return keyword. The return keyword basically tells the compiler this is the value to return, and after that the method is finished. So now this method writes introduction text, returns the result of this readline operation. In the main method, we call this method, we store its result in a variable called region, and then we're using that region here to do the weather forecast. And if we run this again, you'll see that it works just like it did before. So this is an example of a method that has a string as a return type. You can also have methods that have parameters. For example, let's write a method that performs this job of actually writing out the weather forecast. So we add another method here. And this method actually has as a return type void. So writing the weather forecast doesn't have any resulting object. But as a parameter, we need to know which region. And then we're taking all this code here and we call the method again in the main like this. So now we run it, still it does exactly the same. Now when you look at the main method, it basically results in only 2 lines of code. And actually this makes the purpose of the program a lot clearer, because we are doing 2 things. We ask the user for the region, and then we write a weather forecast. And the details of how that's done, that's written in these methods here. Now we can also do a bit further separation. For example, here we're writing the number of degrees. So we could even separate that out in another method. And that's also a method that takes a parameter. Like so. And then we're going to copy this line and replace this with the right temperature. Now the nice thing here is that here we're copying a lot of code. So if we were to make a spelling mistake in one of these lines, this would be a pity. And now we are going to replace it with only a single call to write line. And here, instead of this long line here, we're calling the method. And the same here. And again, if we execute it, we get exactly the same behavior. Now the nice thing of separating out everything into methods is that if we modify a method, it actually has an effect on everything. So for example here, we could add another line, like so. And because this method is called from any of the regions that we enter, this will also always be printed on the screen. We don't have to type this twice, so it leads to shorter code. Let's take a look at one final example. Here we're printing out the temperature in Fahrenheit. So what if we wanted to print the temperature also in Celsius? We need a method that converts Fahrenheit to Celsius. So let's add that method here. That method takes as a parameter a temperature, and it returns another temperature. That means that the return type of this method is float. And that's called as tempf from temp Fahrenheit. Conversion from Fahrenheit to Celsius is rather straightforward. That's done as follows. And let's make sure these numbers are floats. Now that we have this method, we can add here another line. So let's replace this "have a good day," because if the temperature is very low, the day is not so good. And then we're going to call this method and print out the results. And again, because we're using methods to separate our code, this automatically happens for the various regions. So if you run this program, we get both a degree in Fahrenheit and a degree in Celsius. You can use this return in various ways. So one function of this return keyword is to indicate to the compiler what the result should be to provide as a result of the method. You can also use return to do some tests in the beginning and make sure that simple cases are handled differently than complex cases. Let me illustrate what I mean. So as a result of this temperature conversion, if a user enters a really weird Fahrenheit value, it's possible that this temperature becomes too low or too high to be reasonable. For example, one thing you could say is that if the temperature is less than minus 50 degrees Celsius, it's not a realistic temperature. So we should, in that case, do something else. So once we've calculated this temperature, we can do as follows. So here you see that we're handling a special case. If the temperature is really low, we write that it's way too cold and we simply return 0. So let's test this. So for example, let's make the New York temperature minus 1000. That's really cold. Way too cold. Exactly. You can also use return to prematurely return from a method if you know that something's wrong. For example, if the region is not Utrecht or New York, this weather forecast can't really do anything useful. So instead of doing this with an else, you can also do it like this. So basically what you're doing here is that at the start of the method you check whether it can deal with the particular region that's provided. If not, it simply writes something to the screen and it returns. And that makes a separation between the special cases and the regular case. And sometimes it can be helpful that when you create your own method, that in the beginning you handle first these special cases and you use return to finish the method, and then you continue with the rest of the method. So here you see how we use methods in various ways to make this program on the one hand more simple to understand, and on the other hand also easier to extend in a later stage. And there are many ways in which you can use methods that have parameters with or without result values for your games or your applications, and they're very useful. So that concludes this video. Thanks for watching and see you soon.